Hi, this is Peter Woolfolk speaking. Now, first of all, thank you so very much for listening to the podcast. Now, I am very excited to let you know that the podcast is now available on Amazon Alexa. You know the drill. Simply say, Alexa, play Public Relations Review Podcast, and she'll take it from there. And again, thank you for listening. And if you enjoy the program, please become a subscriber. Now, on to the podcast.
Welcome. This is the Public Relations Review Podcast, a program to discuss the many facets of public relations with seasoned professionals, educators, authors, and others. Now, here is your host, Peter Woolfolk.
Welcome to the Public Relations Review Podcast and to our listeners all across America and around the world. Now, question. Have you noticed the growing number of pets in marketing and public relations activities lately? Now, this is not an accident, or is it a warm and fuzzy add-on? According to Forbes Magazine, more than 62% of Americans own pets, and brand managers are taking notice. Travelers Insurance created a series of TV ads in which a family dog safeguards his most precious asset, his bone. Subaru built a marketing campaign and website for its Forester wagon around dogs, declaring the car dog-tested. Americans' deepening identification with their pets creates a huge opportunity for brands. Travelers, Subaru, Toyotas, and other brands recognize the love of pets can make stronger connections with their customers. My guest today is Jane Harrell, president of Cause Digital Marketing, and she joins us from just outside of Portland, Maine. She has 18-plus years of experience of leading content strategy and marketing with world-changing brands on both the corporate sales and social responsibility sides for several notable brands, such as Pet Finder, Animal Planet, Pet Plan Insurance, Random House Publishing, and others. Jane's work has been featured by Inc.com, Time Magazine, Apple and iTunes, the U.S. Humane Society, and others. So, Jane, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Peter. It is a real pleasure.
Well, look, tell me, when did brands begin to recognize that pets were a valuable marketing asset?
Oh, wow. When you're thinking about the use of domesticated species in marketing, we can go back pretty much as far back as marketing has existed. I mean, I was looking at Pinterest boards earlier today with vintage ads in them, and I saw ads with dogs and cats for things like watches, for things like General Motors, things like carpets, and all different kinds of things. Like, you wouldn't believe all the different kinds of brands and advertising campaigns that have used pets, especially domesticated species like dogs and cats, for connecting to customers, really showing them that they understand them, they care about them, and the customer should then in turn care about the message.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about message development. Is there any particular way that the manufacturers will go, whether it should be a dog or a cat or a bird or whatever animal? How do they go about selecting which animal best fits what it is that they're trying to convey?
Well, you mentioned in the intro the great Forbes piece and the fact that somewhere between 54 and 67% of U.S. households have pets in them. And there have not been new stats released since the pandemic, but basically all us pet professionals are expecting that those numbers to dramatically go up because we saw huge increases of people acquiring pets during the pandemic. Now, when we're thinking about messaging to pet parents, we need to recognize that there's a little bit of a tipping point societally that we've reached in the last 10, 15 or so years, where pet has been elevated from here is something that is useful to my life, maybe something that helps me do my job better, like a farm animal, a dog on a farm, a cat in a barn who kills mice, all the way up to now that pet is not just a companion, that pet is seen as part of my family. In fact, according to a Harris Interactive poll, 9 in 10 pet parents in the U.S. consider pets part of the family. Mm-hmm. So when we're first considering that messaging and first considering how to reach out to that, 2/3 of the American populace, we need to consider that relationship and who are you trying to reach. The vast majority of pet parents do have dogs. So according to the American Pet Products Association, about 50% of U.S. households with pets have dogs. 50% of U.S. households have dogs, while 34% of U.S. households have cats. And there is quite a bit of crossover in that. So understanding, are they dog people? Are they cat people? Are they both? Is a good first step. But understanding that deeper bond and deeper commitment as family member, as companion, is really important. And I want to mention that you mentioned a number of brands that I've worked with in the past 18 years, and I haven't worked for all of them, but I have had the ability and fortune to partner with many of them as they're bringing something to market. For example, with Random House, I was working at petfinder.com at that time, one of the world's largest pet websites at the time. And they had this great book coming out that was all about getting animals basically out of shelters for the holidays. Mm-hmm. And we were able to create this campaign that predated me, but then lasted many years after that, and that I had the fortune to lead during a certain period of time. And we were able to activate people nationally, not only pet parents who really actually turned the book into a bestseller and turned many of its subsequent books into really good sellers, and actually a Hallmark movie after that. But we were also able to activate thousands of animal shelters and rescue groups across the country to get really excited about this book mm-hmm. and this whole series of books, and then recognize that those people actually wanted those books to get out there because it shared such an important message of saving lives and of nobody being perfect, which was so just heartwarming and touching to Random House's target audience during that time.
Mm-hmm. Is there a process of selecting or deciding which, some might be clearly obvious, but which animal to use? Obviously we've all seen the Budweiser stallions there and that duck, I forget what that is, but those, I guess, trademarks or whatever. But someone decides, as you mentioned, maybe selling a watch. Is there a process that they might use as to which animal might fit, or are there the circumstances of what the ad is saying or doing? How do they go about deciding which animal works best for which particular ad?
I think, unfortunately, a lot of cats and non-dog or non-horse animals kind of get the short shrift here. What we see is the vast majority of brands kind of default to either using dogs or, in many cases, as you mentioned, the Budweiser Clydesdales can be very well known. But I think that a lot of brands don't really recognize the opportunity with some of these other species. There have been some fantastic commercials where you wouldn't necessarily associate the brand or the product at all with cats, for example, but we have this saying in animal welfare and in the animal industry in general that cats are kind of always getting the short shrift or the short end of the stick. A lot of brands default to either just using humor or not using cats at all in their marketing. And what they're missing out on is this whole phenomena, which we've seen, and even advertising agencies have kind of poked fun at the fact that cats own the internet. cat videos. It was, St. John from Canada, which is a very well-known and respected advertising agency, created this whole catvertising campaign where they went out and they basically said, the advertising industry is dead. It's all about cat videos now. And people don't want to see ads. They just want to see cute cats. And they were being very tongue-in-cheek about it. But the video went incredibly viral nationally and internationally because so many cat lovers just said, yeah, that's it. That's true. I watch funny cat videos before bed. Yeah, exactly. So I think there's less debate and intellectual decision making when a lot of brands are deciding whether to go with a cat or a dog or a horse, but I would actually encourage a lot of brands to open up the realm of possibility and do some creative thinking around some other species. I've seen some great campaigns with hamsters or gerbils or you name it.
As a matter of fact, I think there was a car company that had, I'm not sure whether it was a gerbil or hamster that it was driving their brand new smaller cars. and rather cool animals at that, too. I mean, if they weren't real, they were obviously computer generated or something, but they got the job done. There's no question about that one.
Yes, exactly. And one of the most viral advertisements I've ever seen is one by EDS, which is now defunct, but it was from 2000 and still makes a lot of kind of top 10 advertisement lists as far as funniest videos. And it's all about these really kind of quintessential cowboys in the Old West who are cat herders. And it's mountains of these cats just running around and these super tough cowboys sitting there talking about how they got scratched or how they did different things. And, here's a commercial that's 21 years old at this point, but it still gets play, and the company's not even around anymore because that really touched a note of humor and the understanding that herding cats is not an easy job.
Well, now that you've mentioned some of the commercials that you've seen that have been successful using animals, have you run across some of those that weren't so successful in using animals in their commercial or marketing pieces?
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that I always work with brands on and really encourage any brand to think about is what's the authentic emotion and what's the authentic connection that you're trying to make in having this pet even present in your commercial, whether or not the pet is central to that commercial or not. And there are a number of brands who have gone a little bit off the rails, or whether intentionally or not, they've just not really hit the right note. And one of the reasons why is while they authentically portray certain parts of the relationship, they don't understand the insider landscape at times. And as I mentioned before, with that Random House campaign, having the insiders, having the pet people and pet professionals want to share your message is really kind of core to having a lot of that virality that goes with it and that makes it so successful. But for example, GoDaddy came out with a campaign a number of years ago where you see this little puppy fall off the back of a truck. And the puppy goes on this kind of quintessential hero's journey across hills and valleys and glens to get home. And the puppy finally gets home and the woman says, "Oh, you're home? Great. I just sold you on my website built on GoDaddy." And they were obviously intending to be very tongue-in-cheek, but the whole commercial actually ended up speaking to this phenomena of puppy mills, which is so rampant, unfortunately, in certain parts of the country that the commercial was so widely revolted against and protested that GoDaddy revoked it.
So basically what I'm hearing you say is probably like a lot of other areas, that if you're unfamiliar with the territory and you're going to produce an ad, that you need to have somebody involved in what it is or those things that you're going to consider in the production of that ad so you don't make those kinds of errors.
Exactly. And what I love to see is when brands are bold enough to take it even a step farther than that. If you look at a lot of brands that have really gotten involved in the pet space that aren't necessarily pet brands, for example, Tractor Supply Company and Home Depot are both frequently listed across different media sites as some of the most pet-friendly companies. And Home Depot's policy doesn't even allow pets into the stores, and I don't believe that they even sell any pet products. I know Tractor Supply Company does, but the reason why these companies frequently make these lists and get this PR is that Home Depot, most locations are friendly to bringing your dog in the store, and Tractor Supply Company has had a long track record of inviting animal welfare organizations, so adoption organizations and others, into the store for adoption days, where they will actually help with fundraising and give back to that organization up to $25 per donation at times if people come and adopt in the store. So those deeper partnerships or those deeper kind of lifestyle events where Home Depot or these other brands understand it's a hot summer day. You can't leave your dog in the car. You don't want to leave your dog at home, but you definitely still need to go do stuff and go get stuff. So if they can make it possible for you to bring your dog and have them be your virtual or constant companion, then dog parents are going to react to that and be enthusiastic about that.
So obviously, and I've actually seen a couple of those Tractor Supply ads that maybe the guy jumps out of his truck and brings the dog in, and I think Tractor Supply might sell some dog food or something else along those lines, so that there's a secondary reason for coming there, and that is to pick up dog food while you get other things that you might need.
Yes, and Tractor Supply Company does sell some great pet products, so they have another reason to involve and encourage pet parents to come into the store. But Nordstrom is actually another company that has frequently made those best of pet-friendly lists, and they obviously don't have any pet products at all, at least as far as I know, and they make the list again because they just invite those pets into the environment. Coldwell Banker is another great one where they did this whole campaign around just kind of the joy of coming home. And they did a series of advertisements in partnership with adoptapet.com or adoptapet.org. And they teamed up to rehome 20,000 dogs across the U.S. in 1 year. But the way that they promoted this was happy, funny dogs dancing, that dance of joy when you first come home. And dogs having that moment of greeting when you get home for the holidays, or again, just really pressing on that warmth and that heartwarming feeling of companionship, of love, of you're not alone, there's someone at home who cares. And these are companies that have gone above and beyond, even though they don't sell any pet products, because they understand that it's really important to their customer base. As I was listening to you, I think about, maybe without naming the company, an insurance company that's out there now with this big two-legged, I'm going to call it a clumsy bird that wears sunglasses. And and I, for the life of me, can't understand see the benefit of having that bird on there. That's right. And I don't see how it's going to
have me consider even buying insurance because you paid to have this clumsy bird on it that I can't make any linkage to why it's there compared to what it is you're trying to sell me. So I'm not sure how those things get there, that somehow or another the advertising people must have convinced those folks that this is going to benefit your product or your service.
Yes, I mean, we could sit and have a really good time analyzing that campaign in particular. It reminds me of the college campaigns that used to go around about 15 years ago about honey badgers. Have you heard of that? Where it's honey badger, don't give a expletive that I'm not going to say right now. And the emu just kind of reminds me of a newer version of that. So I think with that campaign in particular, it's less about that homecoming or that emotional connection to a domesticated species and more of this spirit of rebellion that this emu is emulating in some ways. Whether or not that's working, I don't know. I am not that familiar with that campaign, but we could have a really good time analyzing it, I'm sure. With other campaigns, I think some have gone a little off the rails as far as bringing some, I'd say, bizarre humor in, and one of my favorites there is Skittles. A few years ago, they did a Taste the Rainbow campaign, which of course is their longtime slogan. But they had these videos where they said, here, go put your finger on the screen, and then you're going to experience touching something that you'd never be able to touch before, or that you're really going to want to touch. And one of the campaigns, it had a kitten licking the finger that you have on the screen, and then suddenly the kitten's dad gets down on the floor and starts licking the screen. And, you know, it was just this little moment of bizarre, but that's what Skittles is so good at and gives everyone a good what the moment plus laugh.
Mm-hmm. Have you, and you've just mentioned that, as perhaps one of those bizarre moments, what would you consider your most favorite, if you will, animal or commercial spot with animals in it?
Oh, that's a hard one, but I do have to say I really love what Budweiser's been doing, and Budweiser has a long history of animals in their campaigns, in their commercials, in their messaging. And obviously they have the Clydesdales, which they're most known for now, but I don't know if anyone remembers from about 40 years ago, the Spuds MacKenzie ads where they actually had this dog that was dressed up as basically a standard white male in the 80s and treated him as a human throughout their ads. Now, I would not say that that is my favorite use, but lately they've been turning their ads to be much more authentic, much more genuine when it comes to that relationship. And they did this anti-drunk driving campaign where you see this young man say goodbye to his dog at the door, and he walks out, and you watch the dog watch the door throughout the commercial. And the dog is sitting there, and obviously it's night, and the dog's lying down and just looking and waiting and waiting and waiting. And then finally, morning comes, the door opens, and the young guy comes back in, and he says, hey, I'm sorry if you worried about me, but I had a couple last night, and I didn't want to drive irresponsibly. And the dog's, as I said, wiggly and happy that said owner is home. And that is just a beautiful example of genuinely spreading a message where it's something so central to the brand. It's a real societal issue in many ways, and it's touching on that connection between that human and that canine, which, frankly, coming out of the pandemic is one of the connections that many of us in the U.S. have really relied on for our sanity in the last year. So I think that was a beautiful example from Budweiser.
I think of, when you mentioned that, there are a couple of others where you might not even see the product being sold, but that they're focusing on the connection between the human and the animal and whatever it happens to be. And then maybe at the last second or at the tail end of it, you might just see the product logo up there. So they really haven't sold anything or tried to sell anything, but they established a relationship, an emotional relationship between that animal and whatever was happening or the circumstances, and it brought you by, and then you see the logo on the screen, which I think those things can be very, very touching as well.
Absolutely. And one great example of that I saw recently was this CVS ad, where they have a few animal-focused ads where it's got an animal more playing a central role. But this one was about getting a sleep apnea test by going to your local CVS pharmacy. And the commercial opens and there's just a dog kind of sleeping on the bed, and dog dad, dog mom go into the store and they get this sleep apnea test, and he's tested and he gets the mask that he needs to be safe so that he's sleeping comfortably now. And then there's this split second at the end of the ad where you just see the little Chihuahua wrapped up in the different blankets, looking so happy and looking so pleased, and this just moment of bliss capping off the end of that message. And it was one of those times where I just said, yes, they get it. They get that the pet parent is viewing this dog as just part of life, part of my day-to-day. And they did a beautiful job of it.
As we begin to maybe get to the tail end of the show, but are there animal casting agencies, for lack of a better term, that if I'm producing a spot, I decided I would like to have a dog or a cat in my particular spot, where can I go to locate the animal and pick from, or do they have auditions? How does that part of it work?
Great question. And that actually brings me to a side note there. One of the areas that I see pet brands or non-pet brands, get this a little bit wonky or not hit the nail on the head is trying to include animals in your marketing without necessarily having someone who's a specialist in that animal's body language. Because I guarantee dog people know dog language. Cat people know cat language. And I can't tell you how many times I had the CEO of this multi-billion-dollar company come back to various advertising or PR campaigns and say, that cat looks pissed off. Our customers understand that cat needs to look comfortable and happy. So we're not going to send out an ad that's with a pissed off cat or a scared dog. And having a animal professional, whether it's a trainer, if you're doing video, there are trainers who are certified in helping make sure it's a safe environment for any animals included. I highly recommend working with any of them. There are casting agencies, but a lot of the time, if you have a photography budget and you're just looking for some great B-roll or some great photos to use on social media or through your PR campaigns or through your other print advertising campaigns, I'd suggest hiring a pet photographer specifically instead of necessarily a national ad photographer who's then going to add on and recruit animals in a different way. I love working with pet photographers because they have a much broader casting base. They know that they have a lot more connections in the pet space. They have the know-how and knowledge around what are the rules if you're shooting in certain areas, or if you're going to need to bring animals into certain locations. And they innately know, because they're working with these animals on a regular basis, that body language, those tells. So a lot of the time they can help encourage bringing out certain things like that wiggly butt of the dog, or helping that cat feel a little bit more relaxed in a foreign environment, so that you can get those shots that are really going to connect with your consumer.
Just out of curiosity, any idea about the cost for hiring a cat or a dog for a film shoot, be it video or just a photo shoot? What sort of costs are involved in that?
Honestly, Peter, most of the time I have used third-party vendors for that kind of acquisition for campaigns. So I could only give you ballparks that include the photography and locations and videography, as well as the pets. If you go with a private owner and you do a casting call with a private pet parent, there are some things that you should be more aware of. You might not be getting an animal that's going to be necessarily camera ready, but you likely aren't going to be paying the fees that if you go to an actual animal trainer. And many dog trainers will use their own dogs for things like this as a secondary source of income. Many pet professionals will offer or be available for some things like this, but it's really less about the cost of the individual animal and more about making sure that someone is on set who really understands how to cater to that animal.
And that they just not running wild, so to speak, that they have the temperance, I guess, to sit and do what's asked of them, so to speak, by their handlers.
Yes, in some ways, but in other ways, one of the most beautiful things that can happen with animals is that spontaneity. So having an animal and just giving the space and grace for that animal to exhibit some natural behaviors, for that animal to feel comfortable enough, that's one big thing that we see a lot, is that when you're getting together a photo shoot or kind of PR opportunity, there's not much time given a lot of the time to help that animal feel comfortable in that environment. I remember bringing adoptable puppies to various photo studios or TV studios for news interviews, and those puppies would hit the building and basically run in, do the shoot, and then come right out within, 20 minutes at times. If you can take the time to allow those animals to relax a little bit more, if you can take the time to make sure that the trainer has time in advance with those animals to help them calm, you're innately going to have a better result. So trying not to say, I need the dog to sit on the chair and to look at the camera exactly 21 seconds in, can actually give you a much better result, because maybe the dog's going to jump up and scratch its butt on the chair and stick its tongue out for you. But if you're not giving it that time, the dog's more likely going to sit on the chair and shake and give you wide eyes, which is too often the result that we see. Now, one thing I do want to note before we go is it's really critical when you're thinking about consumer messaging with pets to recognize that there are some cultural differences between locations, between different socioeconomic and intercultural backgrounds. So, for example, if you're doing a cat campaign or a cat-related campaign here in the U.S., don't include that cat outside, and don't include a ball of yarn, for example, with that cat's messaging. The simple reason is yarn kills cats. So every veterinarian who sees a ball of yarn in association with a cat is going, ee! and a little bit terrified. But also there's a huge trend in the U.S. to keep cats indoors because it's a lot safer. Versus if you do the same kind of campaign in England, one of the biggest trends is cats should be outside because they get a lot more enrichment. They may not live as long, but their lives are going to be fuller. And that's the cultural just idea of how cats should live. So being aware of those cultural phenomena and the real and in people's minds safety issues that are related can help you create a much more focused campaign that's going to really align with your audience's voice and tell them that you get them, which is always so important.
Well, Jane, I certainly want to sit here and thank you because I've learned a lot from this. Obviously, I've seen pets and animals in ads, but the background that you bring to this certainly has broadened my perspective, and I hope has done the same for listeners. So I want to thank again my guest, Jane Harrell, president of Cause Digital Marketing, for joining us today. And to my listeners, and we certainly hope that you've enjoyed it. If you do, continue to follow us and subscribe. And also let your friends know. And please join us again for the next edition of the Public Relations Review podcast.
This podcast is produced by Communication Strategies, an award-winning public relations and public affairs firm headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, this is Peter Woolfolk. First, let me say thank you so much for being a listener. Now, I want to alert you to our shiny new podcast website located at podpage.com. However, you can go directly to the podcast site located at publicrelationsreviewpodcast.com. There, you can contact me through email. You can leave a voice message. You can leave a review. You can read an episode blog and frequently learn about the podcast guests. You might also want to suggest podcast topic ideas or even suggest a guest. You can also let me know if you would like to receive our podcast listener logo that you can post on your social media. So I look forward to hearing from you about our new podcast website. Thank you so much for listening to the Public Relations Review podcast, and have a great day.